Hey, greetings there, everyone. It is GleeCon here, back at you one more time with another episode of Lore of Warcraft as we inch closer and closer to that classic kickoff. On our last chapter, we started another World of Warcraft role-playing game, Dungeons & Dragons sourcebook. That one was called Lands of Mystery, and it is from the voice of Brand Bronzebeard. So we might take our time and read that one a little bit more because it's more kind of narrative rather than just dry rulebook. At least it comes from the perspective of one of our heroes. We've also been reading Cycle of Hatred, among other things like manga and chronicles. And in Cycle of Hatred, we got some more of Egwin's backstory and how Medivh was conceived in less than romantic fashion. And it's a little different from what we came to read in, say, The Last Guardian, or maybe some of the other more established writers' works. And I think this is an earlier novel, so I definitely think they make it a little bit less, cold and unfeeling. So stay a while and listen as we continue this story, Cycle of Hatred, Chapter 15. Kristoff hated sitting on the throne. Intellectually, he understood the need for it. Leaders needed to convey that they were in a position of authority, and the intimidating physicality of a giant chair that was raised above everyone else in the room conveyed that authority beautifully, but he hated sitting in it. He was convinced that he would damage the authority of the position by making some kind of mistake, because Kristoff knew his limitations. He was no leader. He'd spent years observing leaders firsthand and studying leaders he didn't have access to, and knew as much as anyone living about what good leaders had to do right and what bad leaders often did wrong. One thing he had learned early on was that the arrogant rarely lasted long. Leaders made mistakes, and the arrogant never admitted to such a thing, a conflict that often resulted in self-destruction, or destruction from outside forces. Certainly that was true of Kristoff's previous employer, Garithos. If the High Lord had simply listened to Kristoff or any of the other 6 people giving him the same advice, he wouldn't have sided with the Forsaken. As Kristoff had predicted, the undead creatures betrayed Garithos and his warriors and led to his downfall. By that time, Kristoff had left for greener pastures. This tendency was rather unfortunate because the arrogant were usually the only ones who pursued leadership positions in the first place. The conundrum had fascinated Kristoff as a young student and also explained why there were so few truly great leaders. Kristoff was also self-aware enough to know that he was incredibly arrogant. That supreme self-confidence in his own abilities was why he made such a good advisor to Lady Proudmoore, but it was also why he was so terribly unfit to take her place. Nevertheless, he did as he was told and served in the lady's stead until she returned from her ridiculous errand. All right, well, this pivots everything because they were painting Kristoff as this one-dimensional, just complete, obnoxious jerk, but at least he has self-awareness, and now you can see why Jaina would pick someone like him, because that, like I said in one of the previous episodes, like that's her biggest blunder. And it may still end up being so, because now when she's gone, he is in situations like this. But again, at least he has self-awareness, which is, way more than a lot of people have. On top of everything else, Kristoff also hated the throne because it was a damned uncomfortable piece of furniture. For the proper effect, one had to sit on it straight, with arms on the armrests, gazing down upon one's petitioners with an all-knowing eye. The problem was, sitting like that was hell on Kristoff's back. He could only avoid spine-chewing agony if he sat slumped and off to the side. The problem there was that he looked like he was treating the throne like a sofa, which was not the right impression to give. It was a difficult situation, and Kristoff fervently wished that the lady hadn't hared off into Orc country to do whatever ludicrous thing she was doing, as if the needs of Theramore weren't of considerably more import than the disposition of some rampaging reptiles in Durotar. Lady Proudmoore had done amazing things. For starters, few of her sex had been able to accomplish what she had done, either as a wizard or as a ruler. Oh, there were plenty of female monarchs, true, but they generally came to their position by heredity or marriage, not through sheer force of will as the lady had done. While it was Medivh who first encouraged the notion, it was Jaina Proudmoore who managed the heretofore inconceivable task of uniting human and orc. She was, in his expert opinion, the greatest leader the world had ever seen, and Kristoff considered it an honor to be her most trusted advisor. Which was why her blind spot for the orcs was so maddening. Christoph could understand it. Of all the leaders he had encountered and studied, the only one he might consider Lady Proudmoore's equal was Thrall. His accomplishment, bringing the orcs together and throwing off the yoke of the demonic curse that had brought them so low, was even more impressive. But Thrall was a unique individual among orcs. At their heart, orcs were uncivilized beasts, barely able to comprehend speech. Their customs and mores were barbaric, their behavior unacceptable. Yes, Thrall had kept them in line using what he learned while being raised among humans to bring a semblance of civilization to them, but Thrall was mortal. When he died, so would the orcs' temporary flirtation with humanity, and they would descend right back into the vicious animals that they were when Sargeras first brought them here. However, Lady Proudmoore would not hear those words. Certainly Kristoff had tried, but even the greatest of leaders had their blind spots, and this was hers. She insisted on her belief that orcs could live in harmony with humans to the point that she betrayed her own father. That was when Kristoff realized that extraordinary action would need to be taken. The lady let her own father be killed rather than betray the trust of creatures who, beyond Thrall, would never return the favor. Under other circumstances, Kristoff would never have done what he did. Every day he awakened wondering if he had done the right thing, but every day he also awakened in fear. From the moment he first came to Kalimdor to the end of the war and the founding of Theramore, Kristoff lived in abject terror that everything they had built would be destroyed. Aside from one fort on the Merchant Coast, the human presence on Kalimdor consisted of a small island off the eastern coast, surrounded on three sides by creatures who were at best indifferent, and at worst, hostile to humans, and on the fourth by the Great Sea. Despite his fears, despite his advice, the lady constantly took actions that favored the orcs to the detriment of humans. She claimed it was to benefit the alliance, that they were stronger united than they would be apart. The truly tragic thing was that she believed it, but Kristoff knew better. And when Lady Proudmoore proved herself incapable of seeing the bigger picture, the very bigger picture that Kristoff had trained all his life to see, he got outside help. Doree poked her shriveled head into the chambers.
Sir, the sky's going from Northwatch is getting all glowy. I think it's got a message.
Dryly, Kristoff said, "That's usually what that means, yes." He got up from behind the lady's desk and went out into the throne room where the stone was kept. Presumably that was either Lorena or Davin informing him that the former had finally arrived, her troops having gotten there that morning. Kristoff's plan to have Lorena already in place when the troop carrier arrived was dashed by the airships having mechanical problems that delayed its takeoff, plus the troop carrier benefited from a strong wind that hastened its arrival. Walking up to the stone, which sat on a pedestal in the southwest corner of the throne room, Kristoff saw that it was indeed a light with a crimson glow that indicated that its counterpart at Northwatch had been activated and used. Hesitating for a moment, Kristoff grabbed it. As expected, it sent a painful shock up his arm that almost forced him to drop it. The glow dissipated concurrently with the shock, followed by Major Davin's voice. It sounded like Davin was deep inside a cave and shouting toward the mouth.
Lord Chamberlain, it's my sad duty to inform you that Colonel Lorena's airship is hit to report. Spotters saw the airship, but it was headed northeast. The troops have arrived, but I don't know what the Colonel had in mind for them. Please advise.
Kristoff sighed as he put the stone back on its pedestal.
Damn that woman.
What woman? Doree asked.
Colonel Lorena. Who did she take with her on the airship?
Without hesitating, the old woman called up the answer from memory. Peculiar though her manner might have been, the woman was incredibly efficient.
Major Beck, Captain Harcourt, Captain Mira, and Lieutenant Norolge. Oh, and Corporal Braving.
Frowning, Kristoff asked,
"Why didn't she bring a corporal along?"
He had specifically told the colonel to have her senior staff on the airship and to send the troops along by boat. Then a memory started niggling at him.
I know that name from somewhere.
Doree, bless her, came to his rescue.
She's the one they called the Good Luck Charm back during the war. A sensitive, if I'm remembering right, can sniff out magic at 100 paces.
Right, of course. Kristoff remembered that Boerhaven, who had been a private during the war, not only was able to detect demons that couldn't be seen with the naked eye, but could tell when someone had been possessed by a member of the Burning Legion. She also was always able to find Lady Proudmoore or any other wizard, a skill several generals made use of when the lady was difficult to track down during a chaotic campaign. At once, Kristoff realized what Lorena had in mind.
Damn her!
Letting out a long sigh, he muttered,
And damn myself as well. What was that, sir?
Doree asked. Nothing, Kristoff said quickly. He couldn't afford to explain things to Doree.
That'll be all.
Sounding confused, Doree said,
All right, sir.
Looking at him strangely, she left. For his part, Kristoff stared out the large window. It was hazy today, and he couldn't see more than a league or two out on the great sea. Belatedly, Kristoff realized that the mistake was truly his own. He had let the colonel's hostility toward him, which had always been there going back to the days of the war, affect his own reactions to her. He treated her with the same contempt she treated him with, an indulgence that was acceptable if sometimes counterproductive when they both advised the lady, but suicidal when he sat on her throne. Part of the point of the symbolism of the raised throne was that the leader had to be above everything else, including the petty rivalries of the court. The very arrogance that had done in Garithos and so many more before him had done in Kristoff. If the Chamberlain had treated Lorena with respect, she might have done as he asked. Because he didn't, she took Bullraven with her to once again serve the purpose of finding Lady Proudmoore. That explained why she headed northeast, to Durotar, where the lady was taking care of the Thunder Lizards. Much as it galled him, he had only one recourse. The plan had to go ahead with some small variations. They might cause problems later, but by then the die would be cast. The only way for Jane and Proudmoore to see that the orcs were not to be trusted was to accelerate the inevitable war between them. To that end, he picked up the stone once again, this time with both hands rather than one, which the stone registered as a desire to send a message. This time the stone glowed blue.
This is Chamberlain Kristoff. I'm afraid our worst fears have been realized. Both Lady Proudmoore and Colonel Lorena have been taken by the foul orc cult known as the Burning Blade. The orcs must be made to pay for this. Major Davin, you are to take charge of all forces at Northwatch and prepare for war.
When he put the stone back down, the glow faded, its message sent through the ether to its counterpart in the keep. After that, he retreated to the chambers to finish the work he had been in the middle of. However, the stink of sulfur permeated the air as soon as he arrived at the entryway, which meant that Zmoglor had arrived.
Nosh. Report, Chamberlain.
Kristoff wrinkled his nose, both because of the smell and in general disgust. He hated being involved with demons, and if the stakes weren't so high, he would just as soon run this creature through. But another lesson of leadership Kristoff had learned was that sometimes one had to make strange allies in order to serve the greater good of one's people. That was why Lady Proudmoore had taken the extraordinary step of bringing human and orc together in the first place, and why Kristoff now had to take the same step with Zmoglor. It was a temporary alliance with a minor demon who meant little in the grand scheme of things. In truth, Kristoff was using Zmoglor, playing on the creature's vanity and bowing and scraping before him in order for him to do precisely what Kristoff wished.
All goes according to plan. The people of Theramore are primed to attack the orcs and destroy them.
Good. I will derive great pleasure from seeing those foul traitors wiped from this world.
As will I. Kristoff meant those words. Zmoglor had been a useful ally to Kristoff because the two of them shared a fervent desire to rid the world of orcs. And when this was all over and the orcs were no longer a factor, Kristoff fully intended to rid the world of Zmoglor as well.
Their heart's desires come to us sooner rather than later, Chamberlain. Farewell. Galtak, Erinosh.
Kristoff, nodding, Kristoff repeated those two words in Zmoglor's native tongue that translated as, All hail the burning blade. So we have accomplished a narrative beat, which doesn't always happen in books, but I appreciate that it's happening here, which is the rationalization, the humanization of the villain. We understand why Kristoff is, one, such a D-bag, two, why he even physically appears that way, and three, his justification for betraying Jaina and for being so vehemently against the orcs from his perspective. There's a logic to it, even if, as is so often the case with villains, it's a flawed and jaded and ultimately self-destructive logic. But we also see that he's Maybe you could call it a double agent, but I don't really think so. He's just, in one way or another, he's serving the Burning Blade. So, in the highest levels of the Alliance, the Burning Blade has infiltrated. Demons have infiltrated. Okay, so we have another episode in the pipe, 5x5. Thanks, everyone, for watching and listening to Lore of Warcraft.